Welcome, everyone. For the story that follows, I recommend you turn down the lights. Put on your earbuds. You'll want to hear every detail, every footstep, every whisper. You need to feel the cold the way they did. The summer of 1991 was a pressure cooker in Millbrook County. The air, thick with the scent of pine and impending rain, hung heavy over the dense forest that bled across the Tennessee-North Carolina border. My name is James Tanner, and for 20 years, I'd been the sheriff here. At 48, I thought I'd seen every shade of trouble this rural stretch of Appalachia had to offer. I knew the back roads like the lines on my hand, and the locals by the secrets they kept. I was wrong. I hadn't seen true darkness until the night of June 12th. The call came in just after midnight. The voice on the line was thin and shaky. A hunter spooked by an abandoned car on a rarely used Forest Service road near the county line. "Just looks wrong, Sheriff," he'd stammered. I told my deputy I'd handle it myself. Probably just kids, I figured. It was nearly 1 a.m. when my cruiser crawled up the narrow dirt track. The rain had started, a soft, persistent drumming on the roof that seemed to count down to something. My headlights cut through the gloom and landed on a blue sedan parked at an unnatural angle, its driver's side door hanging open like a broken jaw. The dome light inside was still faintly glowing, a dying pulse in the oppressive dark. I stepped out, my boots sinking into the mud. The air was cold, carrying the smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic and ancient. I swept my flashlight across the scene. No signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing overtly alarming except for the profound sense of isolation in the car itself. It was registered to a Martin Wells of Nashville, over 3 hours away. Inside I found a map, a half-empty water bottle, and a notebook filled with coordinates. They marked locations deep in the forest on land that was a tangled mess of federal preserves and old forgotten family properties. I radioed in the vehicle and requested a background check on Wells. The response only deepened the mystery. No criminal record. 42 years old, a geology professor at Vanderbilt University. What in God's name was a professor doing out here in the dead of night? By morning, with no sign of Wells, I organized a search party. His wife told us he'd been researching old mining operations, but was 2 days overdue. 6 hours into the search, we found his backpack beside a steep ravine, its contents untouched. We scoured the area for 3 more days, but it was like the forest had swallowed him whole. No body, no blood trail, nothing. What gnawed at me was the location itself. The coordinates in Wells's notebook led to the same areas where for years hikers had vanished. Those cases had been written off. Treacherous terrain, wild animals, people simply getting lost. Until now, nothing had connected them but geography. A week into the investigation, a package arrived at my office addressed simply to the sheriff of Millbrook County. Inside was a VHS tape with no label and a single typewritten note. Found this in my father's things after he passed. He worked for the Forest Service from 1978 to 1994. I think you should see it. No return address, no signature. That evening, alone in my office with the rain lashing against the windows, I slid the tape into the VCR. The grainy footage flickered to life, showing Forest Service employees documenting a strange discovery. An old mining tunnel, its entrance partially collapsed. The timestamp read July 1983. The camera followed the workers as they cleared debris, revealing crude wooden supports and a narrow passage descending into absolute blackness. The footage cut then resumed inside the tunnel. The men's voices were muffled, commenting on unusual rock formations, what one called an unnatural symmetry to the design. 17 minutes in, the camera panned across a chamber where the walls were covered with crude symbols etched into the stone. They weren't mining notations. They were something else, something deliberate and ancient. The Forest Service geologist on site looked visibly disturbed. "These aren't from the 1920s operations," he said, his voice tight. "These are much, much older." In the final heart-stopping minutes, the workers found a small opening leading to another chamber. As they widened it, the camera caught a glimpse of what lay beyond. Bones, piles of them, scattered on the chamber floor. The tape ended abruptly with a man's terrified scream. "Get out!" I sat in silence, the static from the TV hissing in the empty room. The coordinates in Wells's notebook matched the location shown in the tape. The next morning, I drove to the Forest Service regional office. The record supervisor, a woman named Eleanor Getty, who'd worked there for 30 years, turned pale when I mentioned the 1983 tunnel exploration. "That site was sealed, Sheriff," she said flatly, "by federal order." When I pressed her, she reluctantly retrieved a thin file. The official report deemed the tunnel unsafe and ordered it sealed. There was no mention of bones or symbols. The names of the men in the video were listed. All had transferred or retired except one, Alan Mercer. He had died in a hiking accident in 1984, less than a year after the recording was made. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "People talk about those woods, always have. The old families won't go near certain places. There's history out there that doesn't make it into official reports." For the next week, I quietly reviewed missing persons reports dating back decades. I found 23 cases within a 10-mile radius of those coordinates spread across 40 years. The pattern was undeniable, a silent, screaming testament to something terrible. 13 days after Wells vanished, I got a call from the sheriff in the neighboring county. A hiker had found a camera hanging from a tree branch near the county line. When we developed the film, my blood ran cold. The first 9 photos were of various geological formations clearly taken by Wells. The 10th showed the entrance to a tunnel half hidden by vegetation. The 11th was a blurred, frantic shot, but it had unmistakably captured a human figure watching from among the trees, tall, gaunt, and dressed in what looked like rags. I organized another search, this time with officers from both counties. We found the tunnel from the photograph concealed behind a thick curtain of undergrowth. The old federal seals had been broken, and recently inside, about 50 yards in, we found Wells's wallet, keys, and a single boot. Beyond that, the tunnel forked into a labyrinth of passages. We spent hours exploring, finding only abandoned equipment and collapsed sections. In the deepest passage, my flashlight illuminated walls covered with the same strange symbols from the video. As I photographed them, my radio crackled with static. A voice, thin and terrified, cut through the noise. "James, get out now." It was my deputy stationed at the entrance. Seconds later, a gunshot echoed through the tunnels. We scrambled back to find him wide-eyed, his gun drawn. "Something moved out there," he stammered, "just at the treeing." The way it moved, it wasn't natural. That night, reviewing my photographs, I saw something we had missed in the dark. Behind one of the symbols on the wall, barely visible, was a narrow crevice. It looked just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I returned the next day with 3 of my most trusted officers. We found the crevice, and with crowbars, managed to widen it enough to pass through. Beyond it was a chamber, unlike the rest of the mine. The walls were smoother, the ceiling higher. At its center was a crude stone table, and all around it were bones, animal and human, old and new. Among the remains, we found Martin Wells's other boot, his watch, and his wedding ring. The investigation that followed was the most extensive in the county's history. The FBI arrived, their clean suits and clinical language feeling alien in our woods. Anthropologists examined the bones, some dated back over a century. Others were more recent, including remains later identified as belonging to 3 hikers who had vanished in the area over the years. What they never found was Martin Wells himself, or whoever, or whatever was responsible for the grim collection. The official report concluded that the site had been used by a serial killer, likely operating for decades. The case remains open, no suspects identified. I retired the following year, citing health concerns. Before I left, I sealed my personal notes on the case to be opened only upon my death. In those notes, which remained sealed until I passed away in 2016, I wrote the truth as I knew it. What we found in that tunnel goes beyond a single killer. The symbols match no known language, but they appear on rocks throughout these woods, some carved centuries ago. According to the anthropologists, the local families have legends about the watchers in the trees that go back to the first settlements. The oldest bones in that chamber predate the mine by at least 50 years. Whatever watches those woods is still there. I've seen it twice since we sealed the tunnel. Once from my car on County Road 17 and once outside my bedroom window. Tall, impossibly thin, and patient. The FBI can call it a serial killer. Those of us who've lived here all our lives know better. This land was never ours. We just pretend it is. The tunnel was sealed again, this time with reinforced concrete under armed guard until the work was complete. The forest has since reclaimed the area and most locals avoid it entirely, but every few years another vehicle is found abandoned near the county line. Sometimes belongings are recovered. The people never are, and on nights when the wind howls through the pine, some folks swear they can hear a whisper carried on it, a language no one understands. They say it's the Watchers continuing their silent, eternal vigil, ensuring that anyone who wanders too far into their domain never wanders out again. My name is Ray Dalton. In 2003, I traded the sirens and chaos of Cincinnati homicide for what I thought would be the quiet life. I took the sheriff's position in Blackwood County, Virginia, a place nestled so deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains you could almost hear the world forget you exist. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Fewer murders, more lost dogs. For 6 months, it was exactly that. The locals warned to me the crime rate was manageable, and I started to breathe again. Then came the first disappearance. It was June. Emery, a 29-year-old local, never made it to her mother's for Sunday dinner. We found her car the next morning on County Road 27, a desolate stretch of asphalt the old-timers called the backway. The car had a flat tire, but there were no signs of a struggle. Her purse was on the passenger seat, her phone inside it, dead. We searched for 5 days. When we finally found her 3 mi deep in the forest, there wasn't a mark on her. The medical examiner ruled death by exposure, a tragic accident. But it gnawed at me. Why would Emma, who knew these woods her whole life, wander so far from the road? Why not just walk down the highway to the nearest house less than 2 miles away? The questions felt like a splinter in my mind, but with no evidence of foul play, I had to file the case away. 3 weeks later, it happened again. A salesman from Richmond, Paul Mercer, his rental car was on the same stretch of highway, keys in the ignition, engine still humming. We found him 4 days later, 2 miles into the woods in the opposite direction from where we'd found Emma. Again, no signs of violence. The ME's ruling was the same: exposure and dehydration. When the third one happened, a college kid coming home for the summer, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern, cold and terrifying. All 3 vehicles were found within a 5-mile stretch of County Road 27. All 3 victims had inexplicably walked into the woods instead of staying with their cars or following the road to safety. Their actions defied every basic survival instinct I'd ever learned. I started digging into old case files. The county clerk, a woman named Martha, who'd been there for 30 years, gave me a knowing, weary look. "You're not the first to notice," she said quietly, pulling out dusty folders dating back to the 1970s. The records revealed 12 similar cases over nearly 3 decades, all found in the woods, all ruled accidental deaths. I brought in state investigators. They found nothing. The FBI reviewed the files and determined there wasn't enough evidence of foul play to get involved. I was on my own. The highway, a crucial artery for several remote communities, remained open despite my protests. In late September, after the 4th disappearance that year, I got a visitor. It was Walter Kirby, the man I'd replaced as sheriff. He was in his 70s now, a stooped frame of the imposing figure he once was. "Heard you've been looking into the highway incidents," he said, his voice raspy. He settled into the chair across from my desk, his eyes holding the weight of years. "Thought you might want to know about the investigation we did back in '87. Kirby told me that after 3 disappearances that year, they'd set up continuous patrols on County Road 27. For 6 solid weeks, they watched that road around the clock. Nothing happened. The day after they pulled the patrols, a local farmer vanished. His truck was found in the exact same spot. They found his body 4 days later deep in the forest. "We never found what was causing it," Kirby admitted, his gaze distant. "But we did find something strange. Every victim had stopped their vehicle voluntarily. No accidents, no mechanical failures in most cases, and we found footprints around some of the vehicles. Footprints that didn't belong to the victims." "You think someone was luring them out?" I asked. "Maybe," he said, leaning forward. "But here's the part that kept me up at night. In 2 of the cases, we had witnesses who drove past. They saw the empty car on the side of the road, but they reported nothing else. No struggling victim, no suspicious person, nothing. It's like whatever happened, happened in a blind spot. That night, I drove out to the highway alone. The road cut through a tunnel of dense black forest. The darkness between the occasional flickering streetlights was absolute. I parked my cruiser in the heart of that 5mm stretch, killed the engine and the lights, and just watched. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. Around midnight, headlights appeared in my rear-view mirror. A sedan slowed as it approached, then pulled onto the shoulder about 50 yards behind me. I watched through my side mirror as the driver's door opened. A middle-aged man stepped out, looked at his front tire, then pulled out a cell phone. He glanced at the screen, probably saw the no service message, and sighed, leaning against his car. He seemed resigned to wait. I was about to get out and identify myself when he suddenly straightened up. He was staring intently into the woods, his head tilted as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, to my utter disbelief, he started walking towards the tree. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, calling for backup as I jumped out of my vehicle. "Sir, Sheriff's Department," I shouted, my voice swallowed by the immense silence. He didn't stop. He didn't even look back. He just walked into the forest, moving at a steady, unnaturally smooth pace. I took off after him, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, trying to keep him in sight. He moved through the tangled undergrowth as if it wasn't there, never stumbling, never breaking his stride. I was closing in, maybe 20 feet behind him, when he veered sharply behind a massive ancient oak tree. I reached the tree seconds later. He was gone. The forest floor was a carpet of damp leaves. There were no tracks leading away from the tree, no broken branches. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed him whole.